Sony's Spider-Man universe is an American media franchise and shared universe centered on a series of superhero films produced by Columbia Pictures in association with Marvel Entertainment. Distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing, the films are based on various Marvel Comics characters and properties commonly associated with Spider-Man. Work on an expanded universe using supporting characters from the Spider-Man films began by December 2013. Sony Pictures planned to use The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to launch several spin-off films focused on Spider-Man villains from the comics, including a Venom film. After the relative critical and financial disappointment of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, these plans were abandoned, and in February 2015, Sony announced a deal to collaborate with Marvel Studios on future Spider-Man films and integrate the character into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This relationship produced Spider-Man: Homecoming, Spider-Man: Far From Home, and Spider-Man: No Way Home, while Sony separately redeveloped Venom as a stand-alone film later established as beginning its own fictional universe. Sony and Marvel Studios renegotiated their deal in 2019 to share the Spider-Man character between the MCU and their stand-alone Marvel-based films. Venom was followed by Venom, Let There Be Carnage and Morbius, both of which have mid-credit scenes that feature elements from the multiverse concept to link the SU with the MCU. Venom and Morbius received negative reviews from critics while Venom, Let There Be Carnage received mixed reviews. The series has grossed a combined $1.5 billion worldwide. Sony is developing a number of live-action films based on Marvel characters, with scheduled releases for Kraven the Hunter in 2023, and El Muerto and Madam Web in 2024. Several more films are in various stages of development, and Sony Pictures Television is developing several live-action television series set in the same shared universe, beginning with Silk. Publication history. Creation and development. In 1962, with the success of the Fantastic Four, Marvel Comics editor and head writer Stan Lee was casting about for a new superhero idea. He said the idea for Spider-Man arose from a surge in teenage demand for comic books, and the desire to create a character with whom teens could identify. One as with Fantastic Four, Lee saw Spider-Man as an opportunity to get out of his system what he felt was missing in comic books. In his autobiography, Lee cites the non-superhuman pulp magazine crime fighter The Spider as a great influence. 130 and in a multitude of print and video interviews, Lee stated he was further inspired by seeing a spider climb up a wall, adding in his autobiography that he has told that story so often he has become unsure of whether or not this is true. Although at the time teenage superheroes were usually given names ending with boy, Lee says he chose Spider-Man because he wanted the character to age as the series progressed, and moreover felt the name Spider-Boy would have made the character sound inferior to other superheroes. He also decided to insert a hyphen in the name, as he felt it looked too similar to Superman, another superhero with a red and blue costume which starts with an S and ends with man. At that time Lee had to get only the consent of Marvel publisher Martin Goodman for the character's approval. In a 1986 interview, Lee described in detail his arguments to overcome Goodman's objections. Goodman eventually agreed to a Spider-Man tryout in what Lee in numerous interviews recalled as what would be the final issue of the science fiction and supernatural anthology series Amazing Adult Fantasy, which was renamed Amazing Fantasy for that single issue, number 15. In particular, Lee stated that the fact that it had already been decided that Amazing Fantasy would be cancelled after issue number 15 was the only reason Goodman allowed him to use Spider-Man. While this was indeed the final issue, its editorial page anticipated the comic continuing and that the Spider-Man will appear every month in Amazing. Regardless, Lee received Goodman's approval for the name Spider-Man and the ordinary teen concept and approached artist Jack Kirby. As comics historian Greg Theakston recounts, Kirby told Lee about an unpublished character on which he had collaborated with Joe Simon in the 1950s, in which an orphaned boy living with an old couple finds a magic ring that granted him superhuman powers. Lee and Kirby immediately sat down for a story conference, Theakston writes, and Lee afterward directed Kirby to flesh out the character and draw some pages. Steve Ditko would be the inker. When Kirby showed Lee the first 6 pages, Lee recalled, "I hated the way he was doing it. Not that he did it badly, it just wasn't the character I wanted, it was too heroic." 12 Lee turned to Ditko, who developed a visual style Lee found satisfactory. Ditko recalled, "One of the first things I did was to work up a costume. A vital, visual part of the character. I had to know how he looked, before I did any breakdowns. For example, a clinging power so he wouldn't have hard shoes or boots, a hidden wrist shooter versus a web gun and holster, etc. I wasn't sure Stan would like the idea of covering the character's face, but I did it because it hid an obviously boyish face. It would also add mystery to the character." Although the interior artwork was by Ditko alone, Lee rejected Ditko's cover art and commissioned Kirby to pencil a cover that Ditko inked. As Lee explained in 2010, "I think I had Jack sketch out a cover for it because I always had a lot of confidence in Jack's covers." In an early recollection of the character's creation, Ditko described his and Lee's contributions in a mail interview with Gary Martin published in Comic Fan No. 2. Stan Lee thought the name up. "I did costume, web gimmick on wrist and spider signal." At the time, Ditko shared a Manhattan studio with noted fetish artist Eric Stanton, an art school classmate who, in a 1988 interview with Theakston, recalled that although his contribution to Spider-Man was almost nil, he and Ditko had worked on storyboards together and I added a few ideas. But the whole thing was created by Steve on his own. I think I added the business about the webs coming out of his hands." 14 Ditko claimed in a rare interview with Jonathan Ross that the costume was initially envisioned with an orange and purple color scheme rather than the more famous red and blue. Kirby disputed Lee's version of the story and claimed Lee had minimal involvement in the character's creation. According to Kirby, the idea for Spider-Man had originated with Kirby and Joe Simon, who in the 1950s had developed a character called the Silver Spider for the Crestwood Publications comic Black Magic, who was subsequently not used. Simon, in his 1990 autobiography, disputed Kirby's account, asserting that black magic was not a factor, and that he devised the name Spider-Man, while Kirby outlined the character's story and powers. Simon later elaborated that his and Kirby's character conception became the basis for Simon's Archie Comics superhero The Fly. Artist Steve Ditko stated that Lee liked the name Hawkman from DC Comics, and that Spider-Man was an outgrowth of that interest. Simon concurred that Kirby had shown the original Spider-Man version to Lee, who liked the idea and assigned Kirby to draw sample pages of the new character but disliked the results in Simon's description, Captain America with cobwebs. Writer Mark Evanier notes that Lee's reasoning that Kirby's character was too heroic seems unlikely. Kirby still drew the covers for Amazing Fantasy No. 15 and the first issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. Evanier also disputes Kirby's given reason that he was too busy to draw Spider-Man in addition to his other duties, since Kirby was, said Evanier, always busy. 127 Neither Lee's nor Kirby's explanation explains why key story elements like the magic ring were dropped. Evanier states that the most plausible explanation for the sudden change was that Goodman, or one of his assistants, decided that Spider-Man, as drawn and envisioned by Kirby, was too similar to the Fly. 127 Author and Ditko scholar Blake Bell writes that it was Ditko who noted the similarities to the Fly. Ditko recalled that Stan called Jack about the Fly, adding that eyes later, Stan told me I would be penciling the story panel breakdowns from Stan's synopsis. It was at this point that the nature of the strip changed. Out went the magic ring, adult Spider-Man and whatever legend ideas that Spider-Man's story would have contained. Lee gave Ditko the premise of a teenager bitten by a spider and developing powers, a premise Ditko would expand upon to the point he became what Bell describes as the first work-for-hire artist of his generation to create and control the narrative arc of his series. On the issue of the initial creation, Ditko stated, "I still don't know whose idea was Spider-Man." Ditko did, however, view the published version of Spider-Man as a separate creation to the one he saw in the 5 penciled pages that Kirby had completed. To support this, Ditko used the analogy of the Kirby/Marvel Thor, which was based on a name/idea of a character in Norse mythology. If Marvel's Thor is a valid created work by Jack, his creation, then why isn't Spider-Man by Stan and me valid created work, our creation? Kirby noted in a 1971 interview that it was Ditko who got Spider-Man to roll, and the thing caught on because of what he did. Lee, while claiming credit for the initial idea, has acknowledged Ditko's role, stating, "If Steve wants to be called co-creator, I think he deserves." He has further commented that Ditko's costume design was key to the character's success. Since the costume completely covers Spider-Man's body, people of all races could visualize themselves inside the costume and thus more easily identify with the character. Commercial success. A few months after Spider-Man's introduction, publisher Goodman reviewed the sales figures for that issue and was shocked to find it was one of the nascent Marvel's highest-selling comics. 97 solo ongoing series followed, beginning with The Amazing Spider-Man #1. The title eventually became Marvel's top-selling series, 211, with the character swiftly becoming a cultural icon. A 1965 Esquire poll of college campuses found that college students ranked Spider-Man and fellow Marvel hero the Hulk alongside Bob Dylan and Che Guevara as their favorite revolutionary icons. One interviewee selected Spider-Man because he was beset by woes, money problems, and the question of existence. In short, he is one of us. 223 Following Ditko's departure after issue number 38, John Romita Sr. replaced him as penciler and would draw the series for the next several years. In 1968, Romita would also draw the character's extra-length stories in the comics magazine The Spectacular Spider-Man, a proto-graphic novel designed to appeal to older readers. It only lasted for 2 issues, but it represented the first Spider-Man spin-off publication, aside from the original series summer annuals that began in 1964. An early 1970s Spider-Man story ultimately led to the revision of the Comics Code. Previously, the code forbade the depiction of the use of illegal drugs, even negatively. However, in 1970, the Nixon administration's Department of Health, Education, and Welfare asked Stan Lee to publish an anti-drug message in one of Marvel's top-selling titles. 239 Lee chose the top-selling The Amazing Spider-Man. Issues number 96-98 feature a story arc depicting the negative effects of drug use. In the story, Peter Parker's friend Harry Osborn becomes addicted to pills. When Spider-Man fights the Green Goblin, Spider-Man defeats him by revealing Harry's drug addiction. While the story had a clear anti-drug message, the Comics Code Authority refused to issue its seal of approval. Marvel nevertheless published the 3 issues without the Comics Code Authority's approval or seal. The issues sold so well that the industry's self-censorship was undercut and the code was subsequently revised. 239 In 1972, a second monthly ongoing series starring Spider-Man began, Marvel Team Up, in which Spider-Man was paired with other superheroes and supervillains. From that point on, there have generally been at least 2 ongoing Spider-Man series at any time. In 1976, his second solo series, Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man, began running parallel to the main series. A third series featuring Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, launched in 1985 to replace Marvel Team Up. The launch of a 4th monthly title in 1990, The Adjectiveless Spider-Man, written and drawn by popular artist Todd McFarlane, debuted with several different covers, all with the same interior content. The various versions combined sold over 3 million copies, an industry record at the time. Several miniseries, one-shot issues, and loosely related comics have also been published, and Spider-Man makes frequent cameos and guest appearances in other comic book series. In 1996, the sensational Spider-Man was created to replace Web of Spider-Man. In 1998, writer-artist John Byrne revamped the origin of Spider-Man in the 13-issue limited series Spider-Man, Chapter 1, similar to Byrne's, adding details and some revisions to Superman's origin in DC Comics' The Man of Steel. At the same time, the original The Amazing Spider-Man was ended with issue number 441, and The Amazing Spider-Man was restarted with Vol. 2, number 1. In 2003, Marvel reintroduced the original numbering for The Amazing Spider-Man, and what would have been Vol. 2, number 59 became issue number 500. When the primary series The Amazing Spider-Man reached issue number 545, Marvel dropped its spin-off ongoing series and instead began publishing The Amazing Spider-Man 3 times monthly, beginning with number 546-548. The 3 times monthly scheduling of The Amazing Spider-Man lasted until November 2010, when the comic book was increased from 22 pages to 30 pages each issue and published only twice a month, beginning with number 648-649. The following year, Marvel launched Avenging Spider-Man as the first spin-off ongoing series in addition to the still twice-monthly The Amazing Spider-Man, since the previous ones were cancelled at the end of 2007. The Amazing series temporarily ended with issue number 700 in December 2012, and was replaced by The Superior Spider-Man, which had Dr. Octopus serve as the new Spider-Man, his mind having taken over Peter Parker's body. Superior was an enormous commercial success for Marvel, and ran for 31 issues before the real Peter Parker returned in a newly relaunched The Amazing Spider-Man number 1 in April 2014. Following the 2015 Secret Wars crossover event, a number of Spider-Man related titles were either relaunched or created as part of the all-new, all-different Marvel event. Among them, The Amazing Spider-Man was relaunched as well and primarily focuses on Peter Parker continuing to run Parker Industries, and becoming a successful businessman who is operating worldwide. Fictional character biography. Early years. In Forest Hills, Queens, New York City, Midtown High School student Peter Benjamin Parker is a science whiz orphan living with his Uncle Ben and Aunt May. As depicted in Amazing Fantasy number 15, he is bitten by a radioactive spider at a science exhibit and acquires the agility and proportionate strength of an arachnid. Along with heightened athletic abilities, Parker gains the ability to adhere to walls and ceilings. Through his native knack for science, he develops a gadget that lets him fire adhesive webbing of his own design through small, wrist-mounted barrels. Initially seeking to capitalize on his new abilities, Parker dons a costume and, as Spider-Man, becomes a novelty television star. However, he blithely ignores the chance to stop a fleeing thief. His indifference ironically catches up with him when the same criminal later robs and kills his Uncle Ben. Spider-Man tracks and subdues the killer and learns, in the story's next to last caption, "With great power there must also come great responsibility." Despite his superpowers, Parker struggles to help his widowed aunt pay the rent, is taunted by his peers, particularly football star Flash Thompson, and, as Spider-Man, engenders the editorial wrath of newspaper publisher J. Jonah Jameson. As he battles his enemies for the first time, Parker finds juggling his personal life and costumed adventures difficult. In time, Peter graduates from high school, and enrolls at Empire State University, where he meets roommate and best friend Harry Osborn, and girlfriend Gwen Stacy, and Aunt May introduces him to Mary Jane Watson. As Peter deals with Harry's drug problems, and Harry's father is revealed to be Spider-Man's nemesis the Green Goblin. Peter even attempts to give up his costumed identity for a while. Gwen Stacy's father, New York City Police Detective Captain George Stacy, is accidentally killed during a battle between Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus. 1970s. In issue number 121, the Green Goblin throws Gwen Stacy from a tower of either the Brooklyn Bridge or the George Washington Bridge. She dies during Spider-Man's rescue attempt. A note on the letters page of issue number 125 states, "It saddens us to say that the whiplash effect she underwent when Spidey's webbing stopped her so suddenly was, in fact, what killed her." The following issue, the Goblin appears to kill himself accidentally in the ensuing battle with Spider-Man. Working through his grief, Parker eventually develops tentative feelings toward Watson, and the two become confidants rather than lovers. A romantic relationship eventually develops, with Parker proposing to her in issue number 182, and being turned down an issue later. Parker went on to graduate from college in issue number 185, and becomes involved with the shy Deborah Whitman and the extroverted, flirtatious costumed thief Felicia Hardy, aka the Black Cat, whom he meets in issue number 194. 1980s. From 1984 to 1988, Spider-Man wore a black costume with a white spider design on his chest. The new costume originated in the Secret Wars miniseries, on an alien planet where Spider-Man participates in a battle between Earth's major superheroes and supervillains. He continues wearing the costume when he returns, starting in The Amazing Spider-Man number 252. The change to a long-standing character's design met with controversy, with many hardcore comics fans decrying it as tantamount to sacrilege. Spider-Man's traditional red and blue costume was iconic, they argued, on par with those of his DC rivals Superman and Batman. The creators then revealed the costume was an alien symbiote which Spider-Man is able to reject after a difficult struggle, though the symbiote returns several times as Venom for revenge. Parker proposes to Watson in The Amazing Spider-Man number 290, and she accepts 2 issues later, with the wedding taking place in The Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 21, promoted with a real-life mock wedding using actors at Shea Stadium, with Stan Lee officiating, on June 5, 1987. David McElhenney, who scripted based on a plot by editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, said in 2007, "I didn't think they actually should married. I had actually planned another version, one that wasn't used." Parker published a book of Spider-Man photographs called Webs, and returned to his Empire State University graduate studies in biochemistry in number 310. 1990s. In the controversial 1990s storyline The Clone Saga, a clone of Parker, created in 1970s comics by insane scientist Miles Warren, aka the Jackal, returns to New York City upon hearing of Aunt May's health worsening. The clone had lived incognito as Ben Reilly, but now assumes the superhero guise the Scarlet Spider and allies with Parker. To the surprise of both, new tests indicate Reilly is the original and Parker the clone. Complicating matters, Watson announces in the Spectacular Spider-Man number 220 that she is pregnant with Parker's baby. Later, however, a resurrected Green Goblin has Watson poisoned, causing premature labor and the death of her and Parker's unborn daughter. The Green Goblin had switched the results of the clone test in an attempt to destroy Parker's life by making him believe himself to be the clone. Reilly is killed while saving Parker, in Peter Parker, Spider-Man number 75, and his body immediately crumbles into dust, confirming Reilly was the clone. In issue number 97 of the second series titled Peter Parker, Spider-Man, Parker learns his Aunt May was kidnapped by Norman Osborn and her apparent death in The Amazing Spider-Man number 400 had been a hoax. Shortly afterward, in The Amazing Spider-Man number 13, Watson is apparently killed in an airplane explosion. She turns up alive and well in number 28, but she and Peter become separated in the following issue. 2000s. Babylon 5 creator J. Michael Straczynski began writing The Amazing Spider-Man, illustrated by John Romita Jr., beginning with number 30. 2 issues later, Parker, now employed as a teacher at his old high school, meets the enigmatic Ezekiel, who possesses similar spider powers and suggests that Parker, having gained such abilities, might not have been a fluke, that Parker has a connection to a totemic spider spirit. In number 37, May discovers her nephew Parker is Spider-Man, leading to a new openness in their relationship. Parker and Watson reconcile in number 50, and in number 512, the original issue numbering having returned with number 500, Parker learns his late girlfriend Gwen Stacy had had 2 children with Norman Osborn. He joins the superhero team The New Avengers in New Avengers number 1-2. After their respective homes are destroyed by a deranged, superpowered former high school classmate, Parker, Watson, and May move into Stark Tower, and Parker begins working as Tony Stark's assistant while again freelancing for the Daily Bugle and continuing his teaching. In the 12-part 2005 story Arcade the Other, Parker undergoes a transformation that evolves his powers. In the comic Civil War number 2, part of the company-wide crossover arc of that title, the U.S. government's Superhuman Registration Act leads Spider-Man to reveal his true identity publicly. A growing unease about the Registration Act prompts him to escape with May and Watson and join the anti-registration underground. In issue number 537, May is critically wounded by a sniper hired by Wilson Fisk and enters into a coma. Parker, desperate to save her, exhausts all possibilities and makes a pact with the demon lord Mephisto, who saves May's life in exchange for Parker and Watson agreeing to have their marriage and all memory of it disappear. In this changed reality, Spider-Man's identity is secret once again, and in number 545, Watson returns and is cold toward him. That controversial storyline, One More Day, rolled back much of the fictional continuity at the behest of editor-in-chief Joe Quesada, who said, Peter being single is an intrinsic part of the very foundation of the world of Spider-Man. It caused unusual public friction between Quesada and writer Straczynski, who told Joe that I was going to take my name off the last 2 issues of the arc, but was talked out of doing so. At issue with Straczynski's climax to the arc, Quesada said, was that we didn't receive the story and methodology to the resolution that we were all expecting. What made that very problematic is that we had 4 writers and artists well underway on Brand New Day that were expecting and needed one more day to end in the way that we had all agreed it would. The fact that we had to ask for the story to move back to its original intent understandably made Joe upset and caused some major delays and page increases in the series. Also, the science that Joe was going to apply to the retcon of the marriage would have made over 30 years of Spider-Man books worthless, because they never would have had happened. T would have reset way too many things outside of the Spider-Man titles. We just couldn't go there. In this new continuity, designed to have very limited repercussions throughout the remainder of the Marvel Universe, Parker returns to work at the Daily Bugle, which has been renamed the DB under a new publisher. He soon switches to the alternative press paper The Front Line. J. Jonah Jameson becomes the mayor of New York City in issue number 591. Jameson's estranged father, J. Jonah Jameson Sr., marries May in issue number 600. During the secret invasion by shape-shifting extraterrestrials, the Skrulls, Norman Osborn shoots and kills the Skrull Queen Varank. He leverages this widely publicized success, positioning himself as the new director of the S.H.I.E.L.D. paramilitary force HAMMER to advance his agenda, while using his public image to start his own Dark Avengers. Norman himself leads the Dark Avengers as the Iron Patriot, a suit of armor fashioned by himself after Iron Man's armor with Captain America's colors. Harry is approached by Norman with the offer of a job within the Dark Avengers. It is later revealed that it is a ruse to coerce Harry into taking the American Sun armor, whom Norman had planned to kill, in order to increase public sympathy. When Harry has the option of killing Norman, Spider-Man says to decapitate him, since Norman's healing factor may repair a blow to the head. Spider-Man also cautions Harry that killing Norman will cause Harry to become the son Norman always wanted. Harry instead backs down, and turns away from his father forever. 2010s. At Loki's suggestion, Norman Osborn creates a rationale to invade Asgard, claiming the world poses a national security threat. During a pitched battle with several superheroes, Osborn fights with the recently resurrected Steve Rogers. However, Iron Man removes Osborn's Iron Patriot armor remotely, revealing Osborn used green face paint to create a goblin-like look. Osborn screams that the Avengers do not know what they have done, only for Spider-Man to knock him down. He ends up incarcerated in the Raft Penitentiary, blaming his goblin alter ego for ruining his chance to protect the world. Sometime after Siege, MJ invites Peter over so the two of them could gain closure over the marriage that did not happen and the breakup. Later, a massive war ensued between Dr. Octopus and Spider-Man to get Lily Hollister's and Osborn's son, in which Spider-Man found that the child was actually Harry's, who later leaves town to raise him. Spider-Man assisted the Avengers in defeating Dr. Octopus' army of Macro-Octobots. He then faced a new Hobgoblin and the Kingpin, but days later, he lamentably lost Marla Jameson in a fight between Alistair Alfonso Smythe's Spider Slayers. After helping Anti-Venom reveal Mr. Negative's true identity, the Queen was revealed as the true mastermind. She wanted to turn the whole human race into spiders. Mr. Fantastic created a cure using the anti-venom symbiote which Peter's clone Kane accidentally cured from his mutations, turning him into a perfect clone. While he and the Avengers battled the Spider Queen in Central Park, Kane killed her and Peter managed to get the cure to every citizen via Dr. Octopus's Octobots. He met with Jay and May while they were leaving for Boston. Because of revealing he had spider powers, Peter's psychic blind spot was weakened, letting Charlie Cooper know he was Spider-Man, causing Peter to be single once again. Peter gives a last cure sample to MJ, who briefly attempted to keep some spider powers and then look at the Empire State Building, lit in red and blue in his honor. In the middle of a fight, Spider-Man was unsuspectedly pinched by one of Dr. Octopus' Octobots programmed to swap consciousness between the two, causing Peter to become trapped in the dying body of his foe while Dr. Octopus claimed Peter's life for himself. In an attempt to take back his life with the little time he had left, Peter broke out of Octopus's cell in the raft, leading to a final confrontation between the two in the Avengers Tower. Though Peter failed to reverse the change, he managed to establish a weak link with Otto's mind using an Octobot. In his final moments, Peter forced Otto Octavius to relieve all of his memories. Having experienced in a flash all of Peter's trials and tribulations, Otto learned his lesson of power and responsibility and swore to carry on with Peter's life with dignity as a superior Spider-Man. A portion of Peter survived in his original body in the form of a subconsciousness. Though Otto attempted to rid of this remnant of Peter, he decided to seek its help sometime later after being overwhelmed by the returned Green Goblin and his Goblin Nation. Realizing that he failed in his role as the superior Spider-Man, having pushed his allies aside and lost his resources in the process, Otto willingly allowed Peter to reclaim his body in order to defeat Osborn once and for all and save Anna Maria Marconi, Otto's love. In the aftermath of Otto's possession of his body, Peter began to amend the relationships damaged by Otto's arrogance and negligence, both as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. He additionally took up the reins of Parker Industries, a small company founded by Otto after leaving Horizon Labs. While adjusting to his new status quo, especially his position as the CEO of his very own company, Peter learned a second person has been bit by the radioactive spider, Cindy Moon. Spider-Man tracked her down and freed her from a bunker owned by the late Ezekiel Sims, where Cindy had spent over a decade in voluntary confinement shortly after getting her powers, in order to avoid drawing Morlun's attention. While Peter notified Cindy that Morlun was dead, he had in fact survived his last encounter against Spider-Man. Not long after rescuing Cindy, who went on to adopt her own superheroic identity as Silk, Spider-Man was approached by a contingent of spider people from all over the multiverse that banded together to fight the Inheritors, a group of psychic vampires and the family of Morlun that had begun to hunt down the spider totems of other realities. During a mission to gather more recruits in AD 2099, the Spider Army stumbled upon another party of spider people led by Otto Octavius, or rather a version of him from the recent past who had been plucked out of time. With the help of Spider-Woman, who had previously infiltrated the Inheritors base on Earth-001, the Spider Army learned of a prophecy in which the Inheritors planned to sacrifice 3 key spiders, the Other, the Bride, and the Scion. These individuals were Kane, Moon, and Benjamin Benji Parker of Earth-982, respectively. With the help of even more recruits from other realities and even a deviant inheritor named Karn, the Spider Army, including a version of Gwen Stacy with spider powers known as Spider-Gwen, launched one final attack on the Inheritors' home of Earth-001. The ritual was stopped, and the Inheritors were exiled with no means to return home to the radioactive wasteland that had become the world of Earth-3145. With the Inheritors neutralized, most of the spider totems were sent home. Following the revival of the multiverse, Octavius secretly created a digital backup of his mind that ended up inhabiting of the metallic body of Parker Industries' robotic assistant, the Living Brain. Octavius routinely hacked into the systems of the market share to manipulate its numbers in favor of Parker Industries. As a consequence of this, the company managed to expand into a global conglomerate with numerous bases in different countries, with the company's trademark invention being a mobile device called the WebWare. By 8 months after the revival, Spider-Man officially became the mascot of Parker Industries under the guise of being Peter's bodyguard. Peter discovered New You as a front of operations for the Jackal, who claimed to have found a way to bring people back from the dead using cloning technology. In the turn of events, the Jackal was revealed to be Ben Reilly, who had been brought to life by the original Jackal before taking his place. The Jackal's plan eventually fell apart following the triggering of cellular decay in the clones created by New You, which led to the release of the carrion virus worldwide. After the events of Go Down Swinging, Peter's life was plagued with problems on both sides. As Spider-Man, Mayor Fisk publicly supported him, condemning all other vigilantes in order to isolate him from his superhero peers. As Peter Parker, his academic credentials were revoked after being accused of plagiarizing his doctoral dissertation from Octavius, resulting in his firing from the Daily Bugle. On the other hand, Peter became romantically involved again with Mary Jane. For a brief time, Peter Parker and Spider-Man were split into separate beings due to an accident involving the reverse-engineered isotope genome accelerator. However, the separation split Peter down the middle, so both individuals did not share Peter's sense of responsibility, resulting in a reckless and vain Spider-Man. Peter eventually managed to reverse the process, and merge his two halves back together before the side effects could worsen and result in their death. Later, Spider-Man becomes plagued by visions of a mysterious villain known as Kindred who has seemingly been working with Mysterio. As this happened, villains the Black Ant and the Taskmaster captured animal-themed supervillains for Kraven the Hunter as part of a plan to destroy unworthy hunters. Spider-Man was tasked with finding Kraven the Hunter, whose ultimate goal through the hunt was to anger Spider-Man and lead him to kill him, ending his curse. After Spider-Man refused and Dr. Connors saved his child Billy, Kraven lifted the force field from Central Park, allowing Spider-Man, Connors, Billy, and the Black Cat to escape while the Avengers rounded up all the loose criminals. 2020's Last Remains. Personality and themes. Sally Kempton for The Village Voice opined in 1965 that Spider-Man has a terrible identity problem, a marked inferiority complex, and a fear of women. He is antisocial, castration-ridden, racked with Oedipal guilt, and accident-prone, functioning neurotic. Agonizing over his choices, always attempting to do right, he is nonetheless viewed with suspicion by the authorities, who seem unsure as to whether he is a helpful vigilante or a clever criminal. Notes cultural historian Bradford W. Wright. Spider-Man's plight was to be misunderstood and persecuted by the very public that he swore to protect. In the first issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, J. Jonah Jameson, publisher of the Daily Bugle, launches an editorial campaign against the Spider-Man menace. The resulting negative publicity exacerbates popular suspicions about the mysterious Spider-Man and makes it impossible for him to earn any more money by performing. Eventually, the bad press leads the authorities to brand him an outlaw. Ironically, Peter finally lands a job as a photographer for Jameson's Daily Bugle, 212. The mid-1960s stories reflect the political tensions of the time. Early 1960s Marvel stories often deal with the Cold War and communism, 220-223 as Wright observes. From his high school beginnings to his entry into college life, Spider-Man remained the superhero most relevant to the world of young people. Fittingly, then, his comic book also contains some of the earliest references to the politics of young people. In 1968, in the wake of actual militant student demonstrations at Columbia University, Peter Parker finds himself in the midst of similar unrest at his Empire State University. Peter has to reconcile his natural sympathy for the students with his assumed obligation to combat lawlessness as Spider-Man. As a law-upholding liberal, he finds himself caught between militant leftism and angry conservatives, 234-235. Powers, skills, and equipment. Peter Parker has superhuman spider powers and abilities derived from mutations resulting from the bite of a radioactive spider. Since the original Lee Ditko stories, Spider-Man has had the ability to cling to wall surfaces and ceilings. The official handbook of the Marvel Universe speculated that this was based on a distance-dependent interaction between his body and surfaces, known as the van der Waals force, though in the 2002 Spider-Man film, his hands and feet are lined with tiny clinging cilia in the manner of a real spider's feet. Spider-Man's other powers include superhuman strength, speed, agility, stamina, reflexes, durability, coordination, and balance, and a precognitive sixth sense referred to as his spider sense, which alerts him to danger. Spider-Man has a healing factor that allows him to recover from injuries sustained during battle. In the aftermath of the 1989 Acts of Vengeance storyline, Spider-Man was said to have superhuman recuperative abilities that sped up his recovery from the exhaustion he suffered in defeating the Tri-Sentinel. The character was originally conceived by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko as intellectually gifted, but later writers have depicted his intellect at genius level. After years of fighting, Spider-Man honed his skill into an equivalent of martial arts that is unique to his powers. Academically brilliant, Peter has expertise in the fields of applied science, chemistry, physics, biology, engineering, mathematics, and mechanics. With his talents, Peter sews his own costume to conceal his identity, and he constructs many devices that complement his powers, most notably mechanical web shooters that allow him to shoot webs, swing at high speeds throughout the city, to help navigate, and trap his enemies with his webs, as well as with his spider signal as a flashlight and a warning beacon to criminals. Thomas Fireheart's scientists, among the best in the world, are unable to replicate the fluid Parker created while in high school. Supporting cast. Spider-Man has had a large range of supporting characters introduced in the comics that are essential in the issues and storylines that star him. After his parents died, Peter Parker was raised by his loving aunt, May Parker, and his uncle and father figure, Ben Parker. After Uncle Ben is murdered by a burglar, Aunt May is virtually Peter's only family, and she and Peter are very close. J. Jonah Jameson is the publisher of the Daily Bugle and Peter Parker's boss. A harsh critic of Spider-Man, he constantly features negative articles about the superhero in his newspaper. Despite his role as Jameson's editor and confidant, Robbie Robertson is always depicted as a supporter of both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Eugene Flash Thompson is commonly depicted as Parker's high school tormentor and bully, but in later comic issues he becomes a friend to Peter and adopts his own superhero identity, Agent Venom, after merging with the Venom symbiote. Meanwhile, Harry Osborn, son of Norman Osborn, is most commonly recognized as Peter's best friend, although some versions depicted him as his rival. Enemies. Writers and artists over the years have established a rogues gallery of supervillains to face Spider-Man, in comics and in other media. As with the hero, the majority of the villain's powers originate with scientific accidents or the misuse of scientific technology, and many have animal-themed costumes or powers. The most notable Spider-Man villains are listed down below in the ordering of their original chronological appearance. Indicates a group. Unlike most superheroes, Spider-Man does not have a single villain with whom he has come into conflict the most. Instead, he is often regarded as having 3 archenemies, and it can be debated as to which one is the worst. Dr. Octopus is a highly intelligent mad scientist who utilizes 4 mechanical appendages for both movement and combat. He has been described as Spider-Man's greatest enemy, and the man Peter Parker might have become if he had not been raised with a sense of responsibility. Doc Ock is infamous for defeating him the first time in battle and for almost marrying Peter's Aunt May. He is also the core leader of the Sinister Six, and at one point adopted the Master Planner alias. Later depictions revealed him in Peter Parker's body, where he was the titular character for a while. The Norman Osborn version of the Green Goblin is most commonly regarded as Spider-Man's archenemy. While Norman is usually portrayed as an amoral industrialist and the head of the Oscorp Scientific Corporation, the Goblin is a psychopathic alternate personality, born after Norman's exposure to some unstable chemicals that also increased his strength and agility. The Goblin is a Halloween-themed villain, dressing up like an actual goblin and utilizing a large arsenal of high-tech weapons, including a glider and pumpkin-shaped explosives. Unlike most villains, who only aim to kill Spider-Man, the Goblin also targeted his loved ones and showed no remorse in killing them as long as it caused pain to Spider-Man, therefore making him not only Spider-Man's worst enemy, but also Peter Parker's. His most infamous feat is killing Spider-Man's girlfriend in what became one of the most famous Spider-Man stories of all time and helped end the Silver Age of comic books and begin the Bronze Age of comic books. While the Goblin was killed in the same story, he returned in the 1990s to plague Spider-Man once again, committing more heinous acts. He also came into conflict with other heroes, such as the Avengers. Norman is sometimes depicted as an enemy of Spider-Man even when not being the Green Goblin. The Eddie Brock incarnation of Venom is often regarded as Spider-Man's deadliest foe, and has been described as an evil mirror version of Spider-Man in many ways. He is also among Spider-Man's most popular villains. Originally a reporter who grew to despise Spider-Man, Eddie later came into contact with the Venom symbiote, which had been rejected by Spider-Man. The symbiote merged with Eddie and gave him the same powers as Spider-Man, in addition to making him immune to the web-slinger's spider sense. Venom's main goal is usually to ruin Peter Parker's life and mess with his head in any way he can. Despite this, Venom is not a traditional criminal, as he is only interested in hurting Spider-Man and does not engage in criminal acts, lacking the typical supervillain desires for wealth and power. The character also has a sense of honor and justice, and later starred in his own comic book stories, where he is depicted as an anti-hero and has a desire to protect innocent people from harm. On several occasions, he and Spider-Man even put their differences aside and became allies. Romantic interests. Peter Parker's romantic interests range between his first crush, fellow high school student Liz Allen, to having his first date with Betty Brant, secretary to the Daily Bugle newspaper publisher J. Jonah Jameson. After his breakup with Betty Brant, Parker eventually falls in love with his college girlfriend Gwen Stacy, daughter of New York City Police Department Detective Captain George Stacy, both of whom are later killed by supervillain enemies of Spider-Man. Mary Jane Watson eventually became Peter's best friend and then his wife. Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat, is a reformed cat burglar who had been Spider-Man's sole superhuman girlfriend and partner at one point. Alternate versions of Spider-Man. Within the Marvel Universe there exists a multiverse with many variations of Spider-Man. An early character included in the 1980s is the fictional anthropomorphic animal parody of Spider-Man in pig form named Spider-Ham. Many imprints of Spider-Man were created, like the futuristic version of Spider-Man in Marvel 2099 named Miguel O'Hara. In the MC2 imprint, Peter marries Mary Jane and has a daughter named Mayday Parker, who carries on Spider-Man's legacy, and Marvel Noir has a 1930s version of Peter Parker. Other themed versions exist within the early 2000s, such as a Marvel Mangaverse version and an Indian version from Spider-Man, India named Pavitra Prabhakar. Ultimate Spider-Man was a popular modern retelling of Peter Parker. The version of Parker would later be depicted as being killed off and replaced by an Afro-Latino Spider-Man named Miles Morales. The storyline Spider-Verse brought back many alternate takes on Spider-Man and introduced many newly inspired ones, such as an alternate world where Gwen Stacy gets bitten by a radioactive spider instead, along with a British-themed version named Spider UK called Billy Braddock from the Captain Britain Corps. Cultural impact and legacy. In the creation of Spider-Man, comic book writer, editor and historian Paul Kupperberg calls the character's superpowers nothing too original. What was original was that outside his secret identity, he was a nerdy high school student. 5. Going against typical superhero fare, Spider-Man included heavy doses of soap opera and elements of melodrama. Kupperberg feels that Lee and Ditko had created something new in the world of comics, the flawed superhero with everyday problems. This idea spawned a comics revolution. 6. The insecurity and anxieties in Marvel's early 1960s comic books, such as The Amazing Spider-Man, The Incredible Hulk, The Fantastic Four, and the X-Men ushered in a new type of superhero, very different from the certain and all-powerful superheroes before them, and changed the public's perception of them. Spider-Man has become one of the most recognizable fictional characters in the world, and has been used to sell toys, games, cereal, candy, soap, and many other products. Spider-Man has often been used as the company mascot. When Marvel became the first comic book company to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange in 1991, the Wall Street Journal announced Spider-Man is coming to Wall Street. The event was in turn promoted with an actor in a Spider-Man costume accompanying Stan Lee to the stock exchange. 254 since 1962, hundreds of millions of comics featuring the character have been sold around the world. Spider-Man is the world's most profitable superhero. In 2014, global retail sales of licensed products related to Spider-Man reached approximately $1.3 billion. Comparatively, this amount exceeds the global licensing revenue of Batman, Superman, and the Avengers combined. Spider-Man is also one of the highest-grossing franchise titles, being the highest-grossing American comic book superhero, EST $25.6 billion worldwide. Spider-Man joined the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade from 1987 to 1998 as one of the balloon floats, designed by John Romita Sr., one of the character's signature artists. A new, different Spider-Man balloon float also appeared from 2009 to 2014. When Marvel wanted to issue a story dealing with the immediate aftermath of the September 11 attacks, the company chose the December 2001 issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. In 2006, Spider-Man garnered major media coverage with the revelation of the character's secret identity, an event detailed in a full-page story in the New York Post before the issue containing the story was even released. In 2008, Marvel announced plans to release a series of educational comics the following year in partnership with the United Nations, depicting Spider-Man alongside the UN peacekeeping forces to highlight UN peacekeeping missions. A Bucina's Week article listed Spider-Man as one of the top 10 most intelligent fictional characters in American comics. In 2015, the Supreme Court of the United States decided Kimball v. Marvel Entertainment, LLC, a case concerning royalties on a patent for an imitation web shooter. The opinion for the court, by Justice Elena Kagan, included several Spider-Man references, concluding with the statement that with great power there must also come great responsibility. Spider-Man has become a subject of scientific inquiry. In 1987, researchers at Loyola University conducted a study into the utility of Spider-Man comics for informing children and parents about issues relating to child abuse. Reception. In 2005, Bravo's Ultimate Superheroes, Vixens, and Villains TV series declared that Spider-Man was the #1 superhero. Empire magazine ranked him the 5th greatest comic book character of all time. Wizard magazine placed Spider-Man as the 3rd greatest comic book character on their website. In 2011, Spider-Man placed 3rd on IGN's Top 100 Comic Book Heroes of All Time, behind DC Comics characters Superman and Batman, and 6th in their 2012 list of the Top 50 Avengers. In 2014, IGN identified Spider-Man the greatest Marvel Comics character of all time. A 2015 poll at Comic Book Resources named Spider-Man the greatest Marvel character of all time. IGN described him as the common everyman that represents many normal people, but also noted his uniqueness compared to many top-tiered superheroes with his many depicted flaws as a superhero. IGN noted that, despite being one of the most tragic superheroes of all time, he is one of the most fun and snarky superheroes in existence. Empire praised Spider-Man's always-present sense of humor and wisecracks in the face of the many tragedies he faces. The magazine website appraised the depiction of his iconic superhero poses, describing it as a top artist's dream. George Marston of Newsarama called Spider-Man's origin the greatest origin story of all time, opining that Spider-Man's origin combines all of the most classic aspects of pathos, tragedy, and scientific wonder into the perfect blend for a superhero origin. Real-life comparisons. Real-life people who have been compared to Spider-Man for their climbing feats include: in 1981, skyscraper safety activist Dan Goodwin, wearing a Spider-Man suit, scaled the Sears Tower in Chicago, Illinois, the Renaissance Tower in Dallas, Texas, and the John Hancock Center in Chicago. Elaine Robert, nicknamed Spider-Man, is a rock and urban climber who has scaled more than 70 tall buildings using his hands and feet, without using additional devices. He sometimes wears a Spider-Man suit during his climbs. In May 2003, he was paid approximately $18,000 to climb the 95-meter Lloyd's building to promote the premiere of the movie Spider-Man on the British television channel Sky Movies. The Human Spider, alias Bill Struther, scaled the Lamar Building in Augusta, Georgia in 1921. In Argentina, criminals that climb buildings and trespass into private property through the open balconies are said to use the Spider-Man method. In other media, Spider-Man has appeared in comics, cartoons, films, video games, coloring books, novels, records, children's books, and theme park rides. On television, he first starred in the ABC animated series Spider-Man, Spy-Day Super Stories on PBS, and the CBS live-action series The Amazing Spider-Man, starring Nicholas Hammond. Other animated series featuring the superhero include the syndicated Spider-Man, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, Fox Kids Spider-Man, Spider-Man Unlimited, Spider-Man, the new animated series, The Spectacular Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man Disney XD's Spider-Man, and Spy-Day and His Amazing Friends. A tokusatsu series featuring Spider-Man was produced by Toei and aired in Japan. It is commonly referred to by its Japanese pronunciation Spider-Man. Spider-Man also appeared in other print forms besides the comics, including novels, children's books, and the daily newspaper comic strip The Amazing Spider-Man, which debuted in January 1977, with the earliest installments written by Stan Lee and drawn by John Romita Sr. Spider-Man has been adapted to other media including games, toys, collectibles, and miscellaneous memorabilia, and has appeared as the main character in numerous computer and video games on over 15 gaming platforms. Spider-Man was featured in a trilogy of live-action films directed by Sam Raimi and starring Tobey Maguire as the titular superhero. The first Spider-Man film of the trilogy was released on May 3, 2002, followed by Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3. A third sequel was originally scheduled to be released in 2011, however, Sony later decided to reboot the franchise with a new director and cast. The reboot, titled The Amazing Spider-Man, was released on July 3, 2012. Directed by Mark Webb and starring Andrew Garfield as the new Spider-Man. It was followed by The Amazing Spider-Man 2. In 2015, Sony and Disney made a deal for Spider-Man to appear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Tom Holland made his debut as Spider-Man in the MCU film Captain America: Civil War, before later starring in his stand-alone film Spider-Man: Homecoming, directed by John Watts. Holland reprised his role as Spider-Man in Avengers: Infinity War, Avengers: Endgame, Spider-Man: Far From Home, and Spider-Man: No Way Home. Maguire and Garfield reprised their roles as past Spider-Men in the latter film. Jake Johnson voiced an alternate universe version of Spider-Man in the animated film Spider-Man: Into the Spider-Verse, and will reprise the role in its sequel in Spider-Man: Across the Spider-Verse. Chris Pine also voiced another version of Peter Parker in Into the Spider-Verse. Following a brief contract dispute over financial terms, in 2019 Sony and Disney reached a deal to allow Spider-Man to return to the MCU, with the two studios jointly producing Spider-Man films. A Broadway musical, Spider-Man: Turn Off the Dark, began previews on November 14, 2010, at the Foxwoods Theatre on Broadway, with the official opening night on June 14, 2011. The music and lyrics were written by Bono and the Edge of the rock group U2, with a book by Julie Taymor, Glenn Berger, Roberto Aguirre Sacasa. Turn Off the Dark is currently the most expensive musical in Broadway history, costing an estimated $70 million. In addition, the show's unusually high running costs are reported to have been about $1.2 million per week. In the fine arts, and starting with the pop art period and on a continuing basis since the 1960s, the character of Spider-Man has been appropriated by multiple visual artists and incorporated into contemporary artwork, most notably by Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, Mel Ramos, Dulce Pinzone, Mr. Brainwash, F. Lennox Campello, and others.